LeighTDickey.com. What's going on, everybody? Leigh Dickey here. Welcome to another episode, to a new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. How are you all today? I am recording this intro on November 2nd, 2019, and I'm sitting in one of my outdoor offices. I'm not used to sitting in my outdoor office with a jacket on and with it being so cold. Yes, I know it's November and we're getting into the colder parts of the year, but I'm still not used to it. I'm wearing gloves, I'm wearing a jacket, I'm wearing a hat. I suppose that's just par for the course and just somebody marking his territory, but I am not used to this at all. Not used to sitting in an outdoor office where it's 7:15 and I'm recording an intro having to bundle up. Oh well, whatever. It's par for the course and it's just business as usual, as you know how it goes. But today, welcome to a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast and a new episode in the Star Wars mini-series here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. Before I tell you who my guest is, I want to tell you where to find the Beats and Speaks podcast. Of course, new episodes of the Beats and Speaks podcast are released every Friday at midnight Eastern Time on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and your favorite podcast app and player of choice. Now, we're also on YouTube if you search for Leigh Dickey TV. Of course, all those links will be in the description. If you'd like to be a guest on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, please email me at LeighTDickey, that's LeighTDickey @gmail.com, and we will set something up and go from there so you and I can have a good old-fashioned conversation and you can find yourself on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Now, you can leave us reviews too, and please do. Comment, like, share, subscribe, and leave us a review on iTunes, your favorite podcast app and player of choice. You can also leave reviews on my official Facebook page, which is facebook.com/LeighTDickey. All right, now that all that housekeeping is out of the way, I suppose I should tell you about my guest this week. My guest on this new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast and a new episode in the Star Wars mini-series right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast is Sam Ince from Melbourne, Australia. He is a co-host or the host of the Beta Network podcast, which is a gaming and film podcast. All the latest and greatest in games and film can be found right there on the Beta Network podcast from Sam Ince. It was a real pleasure to have Sam on to talk his fandom of Star Wars, where it started, what he thinks of the prequels, whether they were necessary, how excited he is for The Rise of Skywalker, whether Yoda is the greatest teacher. Everything and anything Star Wars came out in this episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast and in this episode of the Star Wars miniseries right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. Of course, you can find the Beta Network on your favorite podcast app and player of choice. I will leave several links down below. Go subscribe to Sam and the Beta Network podcast. Go follow him. Go subscribe to him. Go leave him reviews and go be nice to him, you know. Go listen to the episodes and listen to the podcast for the Beta Network. It's a fantastic show. I'm knee-deep into it. There are about 17 episodes in as of the recording of this intro, but it is a great show. Sam was a fantastic guest. So Sam, if you're listening to this, please do enjoy the episode. It was a pleasure to have you on, and if you ever want to come back and do another episode, my inbox is always on and my door is always open. And if any of your co-hosts want to do an episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, the invitation is extended to them as well. So, I hope you guys enjoy the episode. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy Sam Ince right here on the new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast and a new episode within the Star Wars miniseries right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. Go find the Beta Network podcast, which is Sam's show, on your favorite podcast app and player of choice. But that's all the shilling I want to do for right now. Let's get into the main event. Why you guys are here. Sam Ince on a new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast talking all about Star Wars. Here we go.
Hi, this is Sam from the Beta Network podcast, and you're listening to the Beats and Speaks podcast with Leigh Dickey.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Of course, I am your host, Leigh Dickey, and today I am lucky enough to be joined by a very patient man, because this is about the fourth or fifth time we've tried to do this. He is joining us all the way from Melbourne, Australia, so he's living in the future. Now, granted, maybe you need a DeLorean to get there. I don't know, but at this hour, I'm not sure whether I can get up to 88 miles an hour, but I'm sure he can tell us what the future looks like. We're here to talk about Star Wars, and I'm joined by Sam Ince of the Beta Network. Sam, how are you? Thank you for joining us this week.
Hi, Leigh. Thank you so much for having me on. And I'll say that the future for you holds that you will be into Star Wars, hopefully.
That is the goal of this little mini-series on the Beats and Speaks podcast. Now, you're a fan. I am not. Or at least I'm not as big of a fan. I suppose as I'm getting older, I'm starting to gain an appreciation for the films themselves. I know I love the music. Like John Williams is a fantastic composer. And I know he's done Home Alone, he's done Superman, and of course he's done Star Wars and a whole boatload of others. So if anybody out there is looking for a sort of film music to sort of get lost to, anything by John Williams will satiate your palate. So, but where did your fandom of Star Wars start?
Yeah. So for me, it's good that you raised the point of John Williams because I myself am a musician, so that's actually part of what drew me in. But for me, it actually started when I was about 6 years old. So a little bit about me, I'm into video games and film. I've been a gamer since I was about 6 years old. So, along with that naturally comes watching a lot of movies, and especially because I'm the nerd type, I always look for, that style of film. So for me, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Back to the Future, I guess is not as nerdy, but I was very much into that sci-fi, fantasy kind of stuff. But for me, it started with just watching action films with my dad. So he had random videos that you'd put in a VCR back in the day. And one day I decided, I want to watch something different. And I looked through his shelf and found there was episode 1, The Phantom Menace of Star Wars. So I said, I'll pop this in and we'll see how it goes, I guess. And I found myself immediately getting lost in not only in the score, but in those fight scenes, which granted we had to wait a bit of time for because the biggest fight scene and the best one is right at the end of the film. But I think they really drew me into, I guess, just one part of what Star Wars is, and just really intrigued me.
So, I mean, you mentioned The Phantom Menace being your first foray into the Star Wars franchise or universe. So I'm assuming you had to go backwards and see the original trilogy.
I did, yes.
So what was that like for you?
Well, I can tell you one thing. Action scenes do not come across as well in terms of, obviously, production value and things like that. But having said that, when I went back to watch the others, I found there was something about those films that the prequels, or specifically The Phantom Menace at the time, was missing, and that was just how, I guess, directed the story, how, or should I say, it was really much following the path properly rather than scattering out into a few different things. Because as a kid, the whole trade negotiation section of the Phantom Menace did not mean a thing to me. I didn't understand it, and I wasn't trying to understand it, to be honest, because it all went over my head. But I honestly, even though the production value was a bit lower because of the time, of course, I still found myself just absolutely loving those prequels from the start of episode 4, when it opens up into space and you just got a massive starfighter. I believe it was the battle. I've lost the names now, but those big battle cruiser ships. One of them was chasing down the little rebel ship and was firing away at. It was one of these things that's like, oh, you immediately notice just the size of the Empire versus the Resistance. And I'm like, okay, if the Resistance is going to win this, they got a lot of prepping to do. And that really got me intrigued in the story of the originals.
See, this interview between you and I right now was probably one that I was most excited for. I've done a few of these in this Star Wars miniseries in the canon, waiting to be released. But I was wondering, did anything differ in terms of what you guys saw over in Melbourne, Australia, where you're from, and like I live in Canada myself. Is there anything that differed in terms of what you saw when it came to the release of the films or any of the merchandise in Melbourne as opposed to, like, say, what we got here in North America?
Well, as far as I'm aware, obviously the films would have had to have been the exact same. I'd be a little bit annoyed if we got something different to what you guys got. But no, mostly it was the same. Merchandise was, pretty much the same. We got the toy lightsabers, the plushie dolls, all the standard kind of stuff that a film will do to really promote themselves. I would definitely say that the films, how they were presented to us, the exact same, and I feel like the fandom is probably also the same and just as strong over here as it probably is in North America.
So, I mean, you mentioned the Phantom Menace earlier, that being the start of the prequel trilogy with Attack of the Clones following that, and then Revenge of the Sith following that, and Wikipedia is my reference, by the way, for those wondering. He's not a big fan. How did he figure that out? Believe me, Wikipedia will tell you everything. So, you started with the prequels, or at least the start of the prequels with the Phantom Menace as your first foray into Star Wars.
Yeah.
Do you think they were necessary?
Okay, so that is a question that I was kind of ready for, but also kind of not. I think that without the prequels, they could have still gone on to make the current ones, which they're doing. It would have been nice to see them carry on from the original trilogy. However, I'd say that, I may have a bit of bias because, of course, the prequels, one of the prequel films was my first film. I personally feel that whether they were necessary or not, which I would probably say in terms of timeline, they probably weren't that necessary. They were still films that I felt in their own way did explain how we got to the original trilogy, And whilst a lot of obviously older Star Wars fans were not a fan of the prequels at all, I felt that over time there was a growing appreciation for the prequels. I mean, you've seen all the little side of it. You've seen all the memes about General Kenobi, and that one's one of the biggest ones I could think of. But on top of that, the fact that a lot of people now are asking for we're asking for an ObiWan Kenobi film featuring Ewan McGregor just shows that even if they weren't that necessary, there was definitely a fandom for them, and we're happy that they were there, even if not directly at the time.
Fair enough. I mean, and believe me, I want to get an appreciation for Star Wars, so I love talking to people like yourself when it comes to, understanding where this all, the franchise and your fandom of it all sits. With, like I suppose, okay, you mentioned the newer films.
Yep.
Why don't we get into that a little bit? Like, how do you feel about the sort of the Disney takeover, the Disneyfication of the Star Wars franchise?
Yeah. So for me, I'm very optimistic with the films. Like, I'm always happy to hear that someone's taking it on and furthering the story for it. Of course, like any Star Wars fan, I noticed that there were a few issues with Episode 8, and that they kind of pulled us out a little bit. Obviously there are some fans who have an issue with them, with the new films all around. I personally still liked 8 to some extent. I thought it was an enjoyable film. I absolutely loved 7 as the start up to the new trilogy, but I'm also just happy that Disney has taken the approach of going, not only are you getting the films, we're doing other films in between. For example, Solo, A Star Wars Story, as well as there was the other one, which is just blanking on me right now. I'll be honest, that one I didn't enjoy as much, which is a fairly unpopular opinion. Rogue One, there we go. But I'm just glad they're also looking into TV series, obviously launching with Disney Plus. Just means that we're getting, more stuff that's not just based around Anakin and Luke Skywalker, that we're actually getting some other stuff, just exploring the world of Star Wars.
So, I mean, I don't know. I've talked to several people, and they've some of them aren't hot on the Disney takeover. Some, I think one of them was. There was somebody I interviewed not too long ago that loved the fact that Disney had taken over. So I suppose, like, with the rise of Skywalker, at least I think it's coming out here at the end of the year. I'm not sure when you guys are getting it. Maybe around the same time.
Around December, Christmas time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, are you going to go see it for the sake of seeing it, or are you going to go see it in the hopes that, like, I suppose it's just an awesome film?
For me, I'm going to go see it purely because I'm a fan. I love Star Wars. Have loved the directions they've taken it in certain circumstances. As I mentioned before, Episode 8 unfortunately didn't live up to the hype. There was just a few thoughts that Rian Johnson had made that maybe didn't really fit with the Star Wars ethos. But having said that, I am definitely really excited to go watch The Rise of Skywalker, to watch this new film, because one, unfortunately, I wasn't old enough to go see the original Star Wars films in a cinema. I wasn't even born at that point. And but when the prequel trilogy came out, I was just a little boy. So again, was not able to get in. So now I just love taking in the Star Wars feel in the actual cinema and going to see, what I'm hoping and I believe will be a fantastic film.
Actually, I'll tell you a story about about sneaking in to actually see bits and pieces of a Star Wars film.
Here we go.
This would be interesting. When I was, I think I might have been 13. So this would have been about 2002, I want to say. What happened was, my sister had come to visit, my dad, my mom, and myself.
Yeah.
And we all decided to go see a movie. The thing is, my sister's tastes and my tastes are very different.
As most brothers and sisters are.
Right? And I'm the younger one, too. So when we went, she wanted to see Star Wars. I had no desire to see it whatsoever. And I can't remember what my mom and I saw. So my mom and I went to see something else. And my sister and my dad went to see Star Wars. I think it was Attack of the Clones at that point.
Yeah. So
they go, and what I guess my mom and I didn't realize is that our film ran shorter than a Star Wars film, as most of them do, because Star Wars lasts about a year. So we get out of the theater that we're in, and my mom is a bit worried because she can't find, my dad or my sister anywhere. We don't realize that they're still in the theater, right? That Star Wars is still running. So we go up to an attendant that works in the theater, and he's just sweeping the floors and, sweeping the garbage into a sort of a receptacle. And we explain what's going on, or at least my mom does. And he says, well, if you don't tell anybody, I can let you in there.
There you go.
And here we are 17 years later. I'm outing the poor guy on a podcast.
I mean, I'm sure by now he might have another job, or if not, he's going to be fired.
Chances are. I'm not even sure that movie theater's there anymore.
Oh, there you go.
But, yeah, I mean, that's basically my foray with Star Wars, with sneaking into a movie theater just to see bits and pieces and wonder where my dad and sister are. But have you, I'm assuming you've seen all of the films.
Yeah, correct.
Is there, like, taking into account that Phantom Menace was your first film, if you put that up against, say, any film in the original trilogy, per se, for argument's sake, what would you rather watch? The Phantom Menace because it was your first foray, or would you rather watch any film in the original trilogy?
See, for me, that's a real hard one. I mean, I love watching. I love watching the films as a whole. So whenever I sit down to watch one, I either end up watching all in the one day, or I end up progressing through them over the next couple of days and just watch one film a night or something like that. So for me, it is a little bit hard to pick. However, I would say that so The Phantom Menace has become a much-loved film by me, obviously, because it was my first experience of Star Wars, and I did go back to enjoy the trade negotiation segments as I got older. But I feel that for me, the one film that I guess really made me excited for Star Wars more than any other film franchise would have been Episode 5, because obviously it has that iconic twist where you find out that Darth Vader is indeed Luke Skywalker's father, which as a kid I did not see coming, and I'm sure that when that was in cinemas, no one saw that coming, because that was the first time that kind of thing had been done.
And Episode 5 is it The Empire Strikes Back, or? Yeah,
that's the one.
That's the one. Okay. So is there a moment in that film aside from like Luke, I am your father, like the pivotal sort of moment in the franchise? Is there a moment in that film that sort of sticks out to you?
For me, it's not necessarily a particular moment. For me, it's actually more the progression of the film. I like the fact that you've got, for example, Luke Skywalker, and he's on his quest to become a Jedi, and he's starting to learn. But then, out of his, I guess, inexperience and out of his lack of understanding and knowledge, he runs off to face Darth Vader before he's ready. And I just like that idea that he comes this kid with absolute passion. You see his heart on his sleeve. It was one of those moments, and like you said, the I am your father, that iconic line is definitely the highlight of the film. I think it's just how everything led up to that point that I absolutely loved. I couldn't pull out specifically one moment, I would say. I did love the training segments with Yoda. That was hilarious. Definitely got a bit of a grin out of that one. But it's just watching Luke progress from, the little, almost the innocent boy in Episode 4, A New Hope, into this Jedi, and the decisions he makes that actually forms who he is by the time he gets to, Episode 6, till he gets to the Return of the Jedi.
So, I mean, we've gone through all that, and there's way too much in the Star Wars franchise that I can possibly cover here on a podcast. But here's a question for you. I mean, I was talking to someone a few days ago whether or not, and I asked them whether or not they think, from a fan standpoint, do you think Yoda is a good teacher?
Oh, that is loaded, isn't it? I'm gonna have to take a second to think about this one, because when you have a look at, I guess, his way of going about his teaching of Luke, when he first gets there, he almost doesn't even seem interested in training Luke. When Luke first gets to Dagobah, the system where Yoda is living, Yoda seems completely uninterested by him, or as it seems to the way I view the film. But I think that what was really vital to the way that Yoda taught was it was about understanding the feelings and the emotions of being a Jedi. He explained to Luke that it was a feeling, not an action, and I think if I compare that to, I guess, my teachers, my mentors, people that I've had in my life that have really helped me grow into the person I am today, the best advice I've ever gotten had to do with feelings. All the best bits, all the best things I've learned have always been, understand how you feel about something, understand what you know about something before just acting on it, I guess the modern Jedi, if we fast forward to Episode 7, you've just got someone who's not even considered a Jedi just trying things and, well, again, some people might disagree with me, but you get a Jedi, attempting something, and she manages to pull off this, I guess, Force ability that takes years and years of training. Whereas back in the original trilogy, Luke kind of had to go through all that and understand that. So, and having Yoda there made him, I believe, more rounded out. So I personally would say yes, but I would say he's also a bit of a strange teacher.
Well, I suppose the world is full of strange people, whether it's fiction or not. But I would be one because I'm hosting a podcast, and I'm keeping somebody up till like 1 a.m. talking about Star Wars.
That's all right. Hey, I love talking about Star Wars, so I'm happy to stay up to talk about Star Wars.
Fair, and I appreciate the fact that you wanted to do this again. So thank you. Right before we wrap up, I suppose, if you could spend a day with an actor, a character, or anyone on, say, the production side of Star Wars, who would it be and why?
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm just trying to think how this would work because I'm firing off so many different ideas in my head. I would like to say that I would go bad to be a bit different and spend time with like Darth Vader, but realistically, I know I probably wouldn't. That'd be a bit scary for me. If I was being completely realistic, for me, I would say ObiWan Kenobi, and in turn, he from the prequels, and in turn, Ewan McGregor, because obviously he portrays him in the films. Because for me, I love the idea of, again, I love the idea of training and learning, and I love the whole idea of now the student becomes the master kind of thing. And he learned under Qui-Gon Jinn, and he worked hard to do what was right, and he became a Jedi Knight and became a member of the Council and became a master of the Force. And I just love the fact that, unlike a lot of the other Jedi on the Council and a lot of the other Jedi that we see in the films, he's probably the most level-headed. He understands his position with the Council and he doesn't want to go against them, but he also knows how to go with his better judgment. And knows how to actually do what's right, even if it's against the wishes of the other people who are supporting the good side of the Force, I guess. And also, I love his lightsaber designs, so I would love to get a cheeky look at one of those and mess around with it if I could.
It's all about the lightsabers, I'm sure.
In the end of the day,
the only difference between the men and the boys is the size of their toys.
And how shiny it is.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Sam, for joining us on the Beats and Speaks podcast and regaling us with your love of Star Wars. I appreciate it. And if very quickly, if you're on social media, where can they find you?
Okay, so a couple of places. So I am on Twitter. My personal Twitter is @SamInce. I've also got the Beta Network podcast Twitter, which is basically just a video games and film podcast, and we can be found at the Network Beta. Basically, yeah, we're pretty active there. And I think those are the main places. I almost forgot one. You can also email me. My email is the Beta Network feedback @gmail.com. That's the main email I can be reached at.
Great. Sam, thank you again for coming on the show and pretty much explaining Star Wars to me as much as we both could cover here on the podcast. I mean, thank you, Leigh. My Wikipedia research aside, there is nothing more exciting than talking to a fan. So thank you very much for joining us this week. No worries. Thank you. All right. Sam, again, I appreciate it, and I'm sure we will catch you down the road at some point. Of course. Definitely. I will post all your links below, so guys, go check him out. And thanks again. We will talk to you later, my friend. Thank you, Leigh. You have a good one. You too. Well, there it is. There you have it. There you go. My interview with Sam Ince right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast and a new episode within the Star Wars mini-series right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. If you want to find Sam Ince and his show, the Beta Network Podcast, I will post several links below because it is available on your favorite podcast app and player of choice. Again, Sam, it was a real pleasure to have you on. If you ever want to come back and do another episode, do another round, and go one-on-one with me ever again, my inbox is always on, my door is always open. If any of your co-hosts want to come on and do an episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, the invitation is extended to them as well. But of course, you guys should go subscribe to and go find Sam's podcast, the Beta Network Podcast, which is available on your favorite podcast app and player of choice. But after you do that, please do come subscribe to the Beats and Speaks podcast, which is this show, on your favorite podcast app and player of choice, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, my official website, LeighTDickey.com, where episodes are released every single Friday at midnight Eastern Time. You can find us on YouTube as well by searching for Leigh Dickey TV. All those links will be in the description below. Please do comment, like, share, subscribe, and leave us a review on iTunes and your favorite podcast app and player of choice. You can leave reviews as well on my official Facebook page, which is facebook.com/LeighTDickey, and I will feature them right here on the podcast. I will read them out and feature them front and center on my official website, LeighTDickey.com. If you'd like to be a guest on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, please email me at LeighTDickey@gmail.com, and we will set something up so you and I can have a conversation and you can find yourself and hear yourself on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. All right. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast and another episode within the Star Wars mini-series right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. Go subscribe to Sam Ince's podcast, the Beta Network Podcast, on your favorite podcast app and player of choice. Find the Beats and Speaks podcast absolutely everywhere: iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, my official website, LeighTDickey.com. Remember that new episodes go live every Friday at midnight Eastern Time. And enjoy the show. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. And we will see you all and talk to you all next Friday for a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. We'll see you all next time. Talk to you all later. It was a real pleasure. Sam, thank you again. And we will talk to you all again soon. All right, Leigh Dickey for the Beats and Speaks podcast, signing off. Peace. Leigh Dickey.